Welcome everyone to this inaugural event, the first of the events that the new STEAM Education Research SIG is undertaking in collaboration with the Creativities SIG and the Arts-Based and Race SIGs. So there's a team of us represented here today, but I'd just like to introduce myself, Amanda and Rory as the new conveners of that SIG, and my colleagues from the Creativities SIG, Victoria and Kerry, and Saima, who is representing the Race SIG for us today as well. So we're delighted to be doing this. We also know that in terms of the delegates that are here, we've got a number of people that supported us in establishing this SIG and who are really interested in what this field's about. So we're looking forward to being able to talk to you about the kinds of ideas you've got for how we grow and develop this work. It's an area dear to many of our hearts. And so we're interested to know not just what you think of what our presenters think, but your own ideas about where we take things forward. So there are a number of us presenting today. We've shared our videos, which we hope you've had a chance to have a little look at to just get a sense of the kinds of ideas and arguments that we're interested in. So we've got Hendra here from the University of Copenhagen. We've got Saima from Brunel, Fran from Kingston University, Kerry from Exeter, and Rory from Liverpool John Moores. And we've also got with us Pam Bernard, who we're delighted to have with us, who will be later on giving the Anna Craft Memorial Lecture. So we hope that you're going to stay around to be able to hear that, because Pam is also another expert in this field, and I'm sure we'll have things to add. Oh, so I'm just going to ask one thing. I believe that we should have our microphones off if we're delegates at the moment. I can just hear one at the moment. I believe they're automatically set to be off. Can you please keep yours off during the presentation? We really do want to hear from you and to hear your ideas, but we would prefer you to do that, please, through the chat function on and you can keep a sense of that as we go through. So that would be great if you could do. But also just bear in mind that, as you probably experienced before when you've been in sessions, when you move from one place to the next in Teams, things don't always transfer. So if you've got comments or questions that you want to raise and to pursue in your breakout groups, just make sure you keep a note of those as well, because whilst it's great to have some dialogue going on in chat, the chat that's in this section, in the panel discussion, won't be present, won't be visible when you go into your breakout group. So we have help from our colleagues at BERA who are making this all happen behind the scenes. Heidi and Garvin are working with us, and so they will make sure that things run smoothly for us technologically. So when our time is up in the panel, we will move over into those breakout groups. So they're there if you've got any queries, and if you want to come and say hello to each other in the chat, then please do. As I say, we're delighted that we've got some international representation here, as well as from the 4 nations. So it's not just the usual suspects here, it's a very broad group of people. So Amanda and Victoria are going to have the unenviable task of herding us into some kind of order in order to take us through the questions. So far, there have been these videos up online that hopefully you've had a little look at and got a sense of who we are and the kind of ideas we've got. And from that, we've built on the questions that we sent out and sort of identified the things that are most significant. So you will see in the chat that those questions have already been set up. So the 4 questions that we are going to organise around, which I'm sure the whole issue of what do we mean by STEAM will be something we come back to, but we want to focus particularly on this idea of the benefits of the intersectional lens, what the interplay is between creativity, arts and sciences, how STEAM education addresses those real world controversial issues and wicked problems, and the ways in which we should be characterising the kind of research that we take forward. One of the things that as a SIGs we're really concerned about is the quality of the research and the usefulness of the research in order to move the field forward. So hopefully those questions will be provocative enough for us as presenters to present some ideas to you that are useful to take the discussions forward in the groups, and you will continue with those questions as we move on. So I think, with no further ado, I'm going to pass over to Amanda and Victoria and say, let's make a start. Microphone, Amanda.
What did I say? What did I say 10 minutes ago? I always forget to turn it back on. Welcome, everyone. It's really lovely to see everyone. Okay, so we're going to start off with the first question. The questions are in the chat, so do take a look at them there if you want to reflect on them, and do feel free to add any comments in the chat. Once we then go off into breakout rooms, we really would like your input and your feedback from during that time. So we're going to start with the first question. What benefits can an intersectional lens bring to STEAM education? And I'm going to go to Simon to start, if that's okay. Over to you.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you for the introductions, Jo. So I'm a senior lecturer at Brunel University and recently moved from the University of Glasgow. My main research interest is in intersectionality and STEM education. So there are, in my view, there are enormous benefits of intersectionality in STEM research. So, for example, it's about celebrating and showcasing intersectional identities and of diverse
Simon, I think your mic's gone off.
Yes, someone is doing it from behind. I don't know who is doing that, but
we can hear you again now, Simon.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry about that. So thank you.
No, it's absolutely fine. So intersectionality for me is celebrating and showcasing intersectional identities of diverse range of people. Now, one feature that really stands out for me is that intersectionality dismisses the ideology of a single story or of a group of people. For example, you say that all Indian boys are really good in maths, or all Bangladeshi young women are not. These kind of a grouping of people and having one single story of a group of people, it dismisses it. This is one thing that I really enjoyed while I was collecting data as well, that people, even from the same family, their identities, their intersectional identities were different because their experiences are different, their lived experiences are different. That's why. And in terms of from the data that I've gathered, I think intersectionality also gives you the platform to intersect formal and informal learning, and also intersect arts into it. So if we are bringing in informal learning of science or informal learning of STEAM, there's so much going on in families and in outside of the formal education as well that we don't capture it. But it's to do with gender, it's to do with race, ethnicity, class, race, and so on. So I'm going to stop here because I think others would like to talk more about it as well.
Thank you, Simon. Anyone want to follow? Do feel free to speak.
I'll hop in if I may.
Sure.
Hello, Rory McDonald. I'm a research associate at Liverpool John Moores. And I think, just to add my two pennies on that, I would agree with Simon that I think there are tremendous benefits to this intersectional approach. I sometimes think of the almost the mechanics of the interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary structure of STEAM and STEM integration and those sorts of approaches. And what stands out to me in terms of STEAM in particular is that we don't have these definitions set in stone. That as an area of practice, as an area of research, there is still so much room for people to bring their own voices and to innately capture this intersectionality in thinking and framings of what these subjects are. My work tends to skew more towards the STEM subjects within that, looking at engineering in particular, and that is a subject area that is plagued by inequities, deeply intersectional, deep inequities But what STEAM might offer us is a way of challenging those patterns of deeply entrenched access and participation and representation. That an approach that draws on the arts might invite certain groups into spaces that they are otherwise kept from, in a way that could be transformative. I think it's fair to characterize that with lots of words like could and maybe, because I think it is still an evolving area and evolving practices, and these intersectional challenges are entrenched in a way that makes them, I mean, we'll get to talk about wicked problems later, but that are very difficult to unpick. But the approach of STEAM education can really, I think, open some doors, ironically enough, to approaching inequity. And I think it's very exciting now to be in a space where this is becoming a way of working and a topic for discussion. And we have events like this bringing people together to share those perspectives and explore what those benefits might look like.
Can I just add something to that? I just think, just picking up on your point about the arts, Rory, and also about the could and the would. I think the one of the characteristics that I've experienced in terms of the STEAM research that I've been engaged in, and I do come from an arts background, is around the significance of being able to allow voices and individuality, so people identify themselves and their own motivations because of the kind of more expansive sociocultural lived ways of engaging, and that in itself allows individual agendas to come to the fore. And again, it allows people to surprise each other with their capabilities. So going back to Simon's point about, even within the same family or within the same culture, that there can be hugely diverse skills, appreciations and interests. An approach that allows for that kind of diversity and celebrates individuality also encourages a kind of sense of valuing individual contributions. And that's certainly been a characteristic that I've seen across the research that I've done in primary contexts, being able to affirm the personal.
Thanks, Jo. Anyone else would like to come in and say anything here?
I would. My name's Fran Aragoni. I teach in higher education, and I'm associate professor in physiology and pharmacology. So I teach nurses and pharmacy students from a very wide set of backgrounds. And I think that there is a lot of ontological implications that essentially students are influenced by a multitude of factors in their lives going forwards. And in fact, when they bring their own creative perspective to the table, when they're learning science, you start to have a much richer set of viewpoints, and they're open to discussion. And I think that the mechanisms by which art can actually open doors for science to bring conversations to the table, it makes it a very, very interesting time. Really, really interesting and exciting. Very, very exciting. So that's sort of a little taster of the sort of things that can go on in higher education with respect to this. But this to me is it removes those disciplinary boundaries. So the ratification of disciplines needs to be removed. There needs to be no edge anymore, I don't think. And I think STEAM can enable that.
And Fran, can I just pick you up on that? Because you've talked before about the kinds of students that you're working with at Kingston. How does that, has that a particular bearing on the intersectional dimension?
Yes, we have. So there are in pharmacy, for example, we have 90% BAME students, but they are from a wide range of religions, and there is a lot of, for example, male-female separation there. So we need to just remove those boundaries where people can just talk. So anything you can possibly think of there being a boundary, there probably is with our students as they grow up. They've picked up culturally, they've picked up just through existing, and what we need to do is to just remove all of that and bring everyone to a place where nothing, your experiences are valid, we can talk about them, but at the end of the day we can ultimately bring something different and move on, and so it is important that we discuss all of my students come in with their own lived experiences, and I can't have possibly have ever appreciated it until I've sat down with them and gone through all of the STEAM stuff that I do. So yes, it's so with my students particularly, this is intersectionality is vast. It's a really important side of things.
Just wanted to quickly add, I think Francisca has pointed out a very good point in terms of that it's an ongoing process. It's not like if you have a lived experience and it will stay as it is. It's an ongoing process and it evolves over time. It's not only you, but it's the structuration theory of both you and the environment that's working together. So thank you very much for that.
Great, thank you. Anyone else want to add anything to the first question?
Maybe I could add a little bit.
Thanks, Hendra.
I think in science education research, we have it's quite recently, I think, started to think about the notion of identities or science identities. And I know that a group of researchers at my department, they have been trying to also look into different disciplinary identities, whether a student could see themselves as a physicist rather than a chemist or a biologist, and what sort of sometimes it's stereotypes, right? But also there are these deeply entrenched inequalities that that could be perpetuated by the teaching practices, right, that exist. I think I see the value of arts in the whole discourse of STEM education is that it really emphasizes, like in science, we are often hardwired to only think about hard facts that are quite naively viewed as being detached from from the more emotional and very human experiences, like appreciating the beauty of patterns, Fibonacci pattern, for example, or appreciating also the struggle actually of doing science, like the whole idea of this affective turn in science education. It's not only about the beautiful things, but also the struggle, the frustration, the whole experiences of experiencing failure when doing an experiment, for example. I think arts could bring could mellow down a little bit of that, and it's actually, it's not true at all. If you look into philosophy of science is anything but that this just an entirely objective truth or fact or anything. What we can consider as a consensus of scientific knowledge, it's actually human. It's a result of human creation and formation through a lot of social interaction and negotiations, in which actually some of these more affective and emotional experiences play a very important role. So arts essentially, and I don't want to also perpetuate the stereotype that arts is only about, emotions and all. Art could also be quite robust in its methodology, I would imagine. But it's just the conversation between these two could be very, could be seen as a very, how do you call it, day and night, right? It's just so different, but there are similarities that could be brought into a productive discourse, I suppose.
Yeah. Thanks, Hendra. I'd like to come back on that and say something, if that's okay. I think probably we've moved once upon a time. If we think about someone like Darwin, and off he went to do his observations, he couldn't have done that, could he, without his background in art, his classical training in relation to that. So, when we think about science, there is that argument that science is value free, but science is never value free. The purpose of science in relation to society and the processes of science, even when we're thinking about the ethical considerations and implications of science that's undertaken, that society trusts scientists to be robust and ethical. So that I think for myself, and hello everybody, by the way, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Amanda McCrory and I'm at the Institute of Education, University College London. For me, my interest is in ethics in science education. Somebody's written something very interesting about humanism there, which we can talk about later. But I agree with you, and I think actually what the arts can do is it can bring an additional element that perhaps we once used very well, we once focused on very well, and has been lost because, you know, I think Fran was speaking about subjects and, you know, disciplines and how they've become very rigid, but, you know, bringing sort of STEM and STEM and then STEAM together enables you know, knowledge and skills across disciplines really to be brought together in a more fruitful way, possibly. So I agree with you. I agree.
Definitely. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else want to come back on the very first question, which is the benefits that an intersectional lens can bring to STEAM education, or are we ready to move on to question 2? And anyone else? Pam's got her hand up.
I put some stuff in the chat which basically point to there is no option. It is overdue. Intersectionality is inclusive and addresses all voices, particularly marginalised, but also it actually addresses the coming off this pedestal of, you know, Western Eurocentric thinking. And so when we say arts, whose arts? When we say sciences, which sciences? Which science? Which science? Which art? And so just to say, you know, arts and sciences come together, they collide. Of the Higgs boson particle, and which I wear purposefully today to remind us that education is way, way, way behind where it should be in this thinking and in thinking about intercultural practices in schools, let alone, you know, intersectional practices, research, and in schools, in education.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you. Okay, over to you, Victoria, for question 2, I think.
Thank you. And before we go on to question 2, I mean, one of the things that Fran mentioned just briefly ago was bringing their creativity to the table. And obviously, as the Creativity SIG lead, alongside my colleague Lisa Stevenson, who I know is here in this session, we're interested in the creativities kind of element of STEAM education. So our second question is, how do you see the interplay between creativity, the arts and the sciences in STEAM? And I'm going to go to Kerry for this second question to get the conversation going. Over to you, Kerry.
Brilliant. Thanks, Victoria. And hello, everyone. I'm Kerry Chappell, and I'm from the University of Exeter, where I'm an associate professor. And my background is in arts, dance education, but increasingly working in transdisciplinary and STEAM settings. I should say as well, Jo introduced me as part of the Creativity SIG. I am but a member these days. I have handed over to Lisa, who, as Victoria says, is in the audience. So welcome, Lisa, into the Creativities convening role. I think it's your first event, so that's good to be here with you. So this question about the interplay between creativity, the arts and the sciences in STEAM, I think, and I say this as someone from an arts background, I think in all of these conversations, we have to remember that creativity is not the preserve of the arts. I think we can get tangled up in some of those perspectives where people sort of say, oh, well, the arts bringing the creativity into the mix. And I think many of us have been doing this work for long enough that we know that science has as much a very different kind of manifestation of creativity. All disciplines have that potential and that manifestation of creativity. So I think when we're thinking about the interplay, it's about really acknowledging that. And thinking about, and I think this is the really exciting, the really potent thing about STEAM, is that you are able to then catalyze those different manifestations of creativity so that new things can happen that would not just have happened had an arts approach or a sciences approach on their own. I mean, by sciences, I should use the broader STEM term that we're obviously working within here, but it's not just that the arts bring that creativity, and that catalyzing of the creativities, to borrow Pam's term, is really important, I think, in how this interplay happens. I think I would then go on to say that in order to think about creativity like that, I certainly, if I'm defining creativity, I'm doing so in a very relational and a very dialogic. Sorry, I should apologise. I have one of my children has kindly given me something from school already, so I'm struggling a bit with my voice. Creativity is seen as a relational and a dialogic process. It is not something that happens in individuals' heads. It happens in the spaces in between. So when I talk about in between, I'm thinking about in between people, in between disciplines, and that relationality and sort of dialogic way of thinking about creativity also connects a lot. I was really excited to see Pam's comment about the Indigenous viewpoints in the chat. I think it brings in notions of how the arts and sciences are a very Western approach, how there are different perceptions of the world not being divided up in that way from Indigenous viewpoints. They're sort of false lines that we've made, and often I think in Western approaches to these things, there's a lot to learn from those Indigenous perspectives. And I think also how we then think of creativity as relational beyond the human. I think that's a really important point. Some of us are talking about individuals, humanism, but I do think there's an extension of that to think about creativity and how it manifests in the arts and sciences beyond the human, into the environment, how all kinds of others can be part of the process, so that when we are looking at the interplay, the dynamics are multitudinous, really, in terms of how those three elements can interact. I think I'll leave it there. That's my kind of kickoff, if that's okay.
Thank you, Kerry. Some of the words that I just picked up from there, words that you're using around catalyzing, relational, dialogic, beyond the human, thinking about the environment and others, and the interplay between all of those things. I wonder if anybody else from our panel could maybe offer up a kind of perspective of maybe where they've done some of that in practice, where they've had relational dialogic approaches or catalyze potentially some of those different manifestations of creativity in their teaching practices. Fran, I thought you might come in on this one.
Funnily enough, yes, because I think that for example, a lot of our students who are coming into a post-92 university, being confident and having dialogue and being able to articulate anything is quite a tricky thing, and dialogic teaching is actually really, really powerful for them. And when you're creating things together, you then do open up this sort of potential of talking, reacting and interacting with each other in a way that isn't normally possible when you have very didactic teaching going on. So when you're creating things together, you have a common purpose. There is a much better sense of a class, of a unit. And because of that, I think that people are then able to open up and come out of their shells and share lived experiences. And with respect to what I've done, which is taking them to the Hunterian Museum, which is a trigger point of discussion, because it's quite an emotive visit. It's not just like going to any museum. It's looking at bits in bottles, and it's quite emotional. It's quite brutal, and it's a talking point for students to talk about ethics, to talk about where they've come from, to talk about colonialization, to talk about so many different things that are bugging them or that have upset them. And this is not normally something that is really enabled. And we do it through sitting around a table and making clay or drawing what we're thinking about and feeling about. So in that respect, it is literally creating stuff, but there's also something that is the embers are starting to be flamed, and they're starting to be given oxygen. And with that comes this sort of, the student starts to come out of their shell. They start to be able to articulate the things that they need to talk about and to represent their viewpoints. Because I find that the students that we get in through our doors are shy. They're not the ones that are feeling confident about their point of view of the world. So not only are they becoming creative, but they in themselves are growing into and they're having agency. It gives them agency. It gives them a tool with which to communicate. I could just go on, but you get the gist. It's transformative for them.
Thank you, Fran. I'm just wondering, Jo, if I could draw you in here, because I know that a lot of your work is situated in this realm of creativity, the arts and sciences, and I know that you've done a lot of work with children and young people on many of your projects. So I'm just wondering if you could give your perspective on this.
Yes, I'm working in a different sector, but many of the points that Fran's mentioned, as we've debated separately, connect across the sectors. You know, that notion of the insecure learner that doesn't necessarily quite know what they think yet until they start doing. So the significance of the making is very, very important. And I think probably also just picking, you know, going back to Kerry's point about, of course, creativity is not the province of the arts, but nonetheless, there are different characterizations that occur in different domains. And I guess one of my felt sense is that one of the advantages of art making as a core practice in terms of being and learning is that it's a low stakes way of trying things out and exploring, which is very accessible for learners at all stages and in all contexts. And I think the notion of experiencing the difficulty of materials, spaces, people and problems in very practical ways, whether it's through your body or through materials or in the environment, that is something that is incredibly motivating. And it's a context in which the sense of identity, the sense of one's emotions. Hendra talked in his video about the significance of the affective turn. And I think that's incredibly significant for us in terms of the STEAM education. And certainly in the work that I've been doing, which has largely been focused in terms of upper primary, a little bit into secondary, but largely in upper primary, that sense of being able to make in forms where you are attracted to, have a sense of, and are also playing with the characteristics and finding out how things work, feels like a very human and developmental and constructive way of being. And I think that that sort of the feedback from the children we've worked with is that when you work in the arts, there's something very immediate about it. So if you make a mistake, collectively you sort it out together. You tell stories about each other. I use Leuven Wenger's work in terms of communities of practice, which is really significant for me. And they talk about the way in which in those domains, it's the anecdotes, it's the sharing of approaches, it's the sharing of tools that enables the community to grow. And it feels to me that that's a really fertile environment for children. And so for me, it's not that the arts can't operate without the other disciplines. It has to be this intersection, and it has to be something new that happens from it. But there is something about a kind of hothousing that is low stakes that for education seems really important.
Could I just picture though? I'm really interested, Jo, in this idea of the low stakes point. Mm-hmm. I assume from that you're talking about it as an easy way in, but I think there's I think there can be quite a lot of fear around the arts coming in. We've reached a point where so much of the arts has been stripped out of curricula that actually it's not commonplace within a lot of schools. And I think we can sometimes underestimate the skill with which artists can go in and make something seem low stakes that has got a huge amount of unspoken, non-verbal, embodied, bringing people through using the right verbal language to get them into those spaces that actually I absolutely get the low stakes thing, but I think the skill with which I know your artists, the people I work with, those of us that practice in this way, you create that low stakeness in a very high stakes way, because it can swing the other way very easily, and then the relationship between the interplay, if you like, between the disciplines and the creativity can go off kilter. So I think that's a very careful thing that gets managed by skillful STEAM practitioners, I think.
Thank you for picking me up on that. That's a really important thing.
Yeah,
I don't disagree with anything you said, as you know. I think that probably what tends to happen, and you know, I'm saving some of what I'm saying in relation to a further question, but I do think there's also you know, because there definitely is a training that's needed there, but I do think there's something that with that skilled support is possible to identify a successful enough process, whether it is through the immediacy of physical theatre or through the choice of materials that allows a sense of enough success for there to be an appropriate balance. Again, you know, just thinking about Csikszentmihalyi's kind of, you know, theory about that kind of, that there's enough challenge, but not too much to allow that happen. So I'm not suggesting it's without judgment. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in a sort of an empathetic group here, but I know when we have to start facing outwards to policymakers, etc., being clear about the skills that have to come with that. And I think increasingly we can start to talk about STEAM practitioners rather than arts and science practitioners coming together. We are increasingly seeing STEAM practitioners who have the double skill set. So yeah.
Can I add about the biggest problem that scientists have, particularly in higher education, is they can't make mistakes. They're not allowed to make mistakes. You're not allowed, because if you're doing cell culture or you're doing something in a lab, you're nodding there, it's disastrous. And so everyone is so frightened of error. Everyone has to, and also the way that science is made now, you're only good as your last paper. We don't have any errors. And the ability to just have a go, see what happens, it's not really possible, because also health and safety. Whereas I think actually the arts, whatever it is you do, I find that when I teach art to the science students, they don't want to have a go. There is almost a sort of a big block where they cannot physically say, I've made a mistake. The amount of rubbers that are coming out because something is not exactly precise, and this freedom of just having a go, you've made a mistake, there's no low stakes, is gone. There's so much pressure on students to achieve and to be. So I think that. And the other thing is, obviously, there's very little kitchen science we can do. There's tons of kitchen science we can do, let's be honest, but we don't ever frame it in that way. And we don't have that dialogue. There's lots of art you can do at home, but nobody ever says the science that you can do at home. And what we need to do is to bring that into our spaces so that when we come back from school or uni, we're going, oh, right, that was that experiment I did. And let me just apply that into my own sort of, you know, so we're constantly thinking about the sciences, even when we come out of our environment of, you know, school or wherever it is we're learning. And that's what I think art can provide, is to be actually reframing things and saying, actually, there's science here, there's art here, it's everywhere. And so I think that we don't do enough science in our own kitchens, and kitchen science is the same as doing art. It's the same thing. It's the same practice that happens. If you go to an art workshop, it's alchemy, the stuff they're doing, and they don't know why they're doing it, but it's great and it's magical and it's fun. And I think that we need to introduce that back into science. It needs to be more fun and stuff that you can do at home.
I love the notion of kitchen science, and that is definitely something I'm going to take away from this, is employing some kitchen science into what I do. But I also we'll move on to the next question. I am going to pass over to you, Amanda, but just to note that you know, maybe it's something for us to think about in the discussion groups, but the notion that Kerry kind of introduced of like human and more than human kind of aspects and the relationship to STEAM education, and Pam's put a comment in the chat that maybe we can pick up in discussion groups a bit later. But I'm going to hand over to Amanda for the third question, which might flow in quite nicely to that anyway.
Well, thanks very much. I just actually wanted to make a point really about what was being said. I think actually there are lots and lots and lots of resources on kitchen science. There are lots of, you know, the Natural History Museum, the Science Museum. They're just two I can think of at the top of my head, which produce excellent free resources. The issue here is whether or not people know about them, you know. So for me, just thinking about question 2 about that interplay, my background many years ago is in primary science, and, you know, primary schools are a really fertile ground in order to bring all of these together. But unfortunately, because of, you know, neoliberalism and government policy and the focus constantly on just maths and English, science has become devalued as a core subject alongside with the arts and everything else. So I think actually in terms of this STEAM SIG and what we're doing, what I would like to see is for us to be able to bring together and to, you know, illuminate some of the amazing resources and work that's being done that's just not publicized enough, in my view, because quite often when I go off to do, you know, a piece of research, somebody will say to me, oh, I'd like to do X, Y, and Z. And I'll say, oh, do you know that there's already research on that? There's already resources on that. So in terms of, if we think about the STEM approach and how there's been quite a lot of investment in STEM and in bringing it together, I'd like to see that happening for the STEAM approach as well. Okay, but enough from me. We're going to move on to the third question, which is how can STEAM education address real world controversial issues and wicked problems? So over to you, Hendra, if that's okay for you to start.
Sure, thanks, Amanda. So hi everyone, I haven't introduced myself. So so I'm Hendra Augustian. I'm currently an assistant professor at the University of Copenhagen over here in Denmark. I suppose I was invited to join this panel because Joe attended a session that I presented last year at the Society of Research into Higher Education conference in Birmingham. So essentially my main research is largely in laboratory education, right? So and largely chemistry, admittedly, but my teaching practice really goes across all science disciplines. So we basically we are responsible for professional development of faculty members across different departments, and we also we are occasionally invited by the Technical University in Denmark here. So in a way, we sort of have to appeal to this STEM audience. Not as much in math, I suppose, but I mean, the whole idea of you know, being able to be epistemically fluent, to disseminate our research, to convey some of the key ideas regarding why it is important to look into this interdisciplinarity and even transdisciplinarity. In my work on wicked problems, this is by far still a conceptual work. So I have initiated some work to sort of operationalize the conceptual work into, you know, to provide some more empirical evidence. But so far, so my understanding about the whole idea of transdisciplinarity when it comes to dealing with highly complex problems, which is conceptualized as wicked problems, is that science alone cannot deal with this kind of problem because it is so pervasive in one way. So it is across, you know, different levels of society, different aspects. It is also invasive because it is, you know, like it concerns really the daily lives of our students as well, and us, you know, climate change. Who is not affected by climate change? And we were talking about the indigenous communities, right? I mean, they are probably the most vulnerable part of our society that is the most affected by these really, you know, like big problems like global warming and climate change. But the problem is that in our way of I suppose communicating even, right? Communicating some of the findings from scientific research, for example, we rarely engage the local communities. There is often there's this disconnection, disjunctures between scientists and science as an enterprise, right? As a body of knowledge, and even the government organizations. Perhaps we have witnessed a little bit how the COVID-19 pandemic was a bit of a messy affair when we tried to sort of look into how all of these different elements of society struggled actually, right, to address the problem in I suppose in an effective way. Now the wicked thing about wicked problems is that it is ontologically a very, you know, it's a very ill-structured problem. So it's sometimes it's even it's even difficult to define what the problem is, where the problem starts. So hence it's just very difficult to think about a solution, a potential solution. Now my argument is that because it is so complex and because it's concern different stakeholders, we should engage them more in the discussion. And I think the idea of STEAM as a lens through which we could we could look into this productive collaborative inquiry in which everyone feels heard, and that perhaps sometimes includes the whole conspiracy theorist population in our society. But like, I think we need to perhaps find a way to bridge this divide. I think science has been often, I mean, and I'm saying this as a scientist as well. We are often very rigid in our way of thinking and practicing, that sometimes we can't see that there are other ways of knowing, right? There are other ways of making sense of the world, and I think we need to engage them more. So I think in the conceptual framework, I don't even consider only arts, but we also have to consider humanities, right? The whole ideas of ethical notions, why it is so important to engage the local indigenous communities, because they are the most vulnerable. The ethical implications that could be informed by engaging with philosophy, or so there's the STEM, and there's the HASS, right? The humanities, arts, and social sciences. So that makes it even more, I suppose, more complex and more challenging. It doesn't make it any easier, I guess, unfortunately. So that's the bad news. But there is no other way to go. Like, I mean, that is the only way, because otherwise we will keep operating in our separate silos, and we think that we know everything, while in reality, like, there's only one side of the story that we believe, or we think that we know. So yeah, engaging different stakeholders, different ways of knowing, different ways of practicing, that's probably the argument when it comes to real world, highly complex problems.
Thank you, Hendra. Does anyone want to come back and say anything else?
Yes, yep.
Saima.
Yeah, okay. So I completely agree with Hendra. And while I was listening to you, Hendra, I just realized there's Mignolo's concept of epistemic disobedience. And where you open the discussions of the root causes of colonial thinking, for example, race and racism. So you have to talk about them, you have to open it. And then he says, I believe, that you need to de-link the Eurocentric ideologies, or you need to de-link the power dynamics where the public is not involved. And unfortunately, science has created this hierarchical idea of race, that who is at the top and who is at the bottom, and the people who are at the top have the leadership jobs, or this kind of job, the people at the bottom are not. Or even this brain size of the brain size tells you whether you're more intelligent or not. So females are less intelligent as compared to male. These are all topics that needs to be taught in schools, in my view. And at the same time, not only talking about this, but you're also saying that, look, see, these are all pseudoscience. Yeah. Science itself has proven that it's not right. But then one way or other, unfortunately, this stereotypical ideology still exists. Still, we see that we are very less females are at professors, or especially women of color, and there are less professors. So still the stereotypical stuff, the societal aspect is still there, although science is trying to defy it. Even within sciences, we see this hierarchical problem as well.
Great. Thank you. Fran, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I agree with Saima entirely. I think that one of the things that would be really beneficial to a lot of science is the fact that it's not for example, a lot of scientific advancement is actually created through a global interchange between country to country, and it isn't Europe. But people think it's Europe, and that's what we have to change. And it was like you were saying, Amanda, there are so many resources out there, but people think they can't do stuff at home because science, right? And art is much more accessible. And, you know, when I went to uni, art was the Mickey Mouse thing, because you never have to study, but science is the tough one. Yeah. And there's a lot of mental stuff going on there and preconceptions that we have to remove. And I think that if you were to completely create a completely new discipline, because we're all disciplines, I guess, is the STEAM, then that would remove a lot of that. Because, for example, just look at COVID and the creation of a vaccine. That vaccine shouldn't have been created as quickly as it was without this global involvement of people from all over the world, all different nations, all different languages, all different colours. And yet people still bang on about the fact it was that Britain that got it first, and then it was Russia, and then a very white type of ideal of you know, whatever it is. It's not like that. Reality isn't like that. Just as scientists aren't all men, the scientists aren't all one colour. It's this idea that we have that has been perpetuated. I know who it's by, and we have to break that. So maybe the only way we can do that is by creating something completely different, a different club, I don't know, altogether, that gets people to ignore this. I don't know what the answer is.
Can I respond to that? So we have another research group at our department, and they have started this project on art-based sustainability communication. Sustainability is one of the wicked problems, right? And when it comes to these kind of complex problems, our role is more science education research or STEAM education research, but also there is a thing called science communication, with how to communicate, as I mentioned before, this knowledge and findings from scientific research to lay public, if you will. And that also entails a lot of, like complexities, because we speak different language apparently, and scientific language has been known to not accessible to lay people, and art can be a powerful way to sort of to convey that very complex message of complex problem in a more hopefully in a more accessible way, as you mentioned, through arts. And I think so they just published an article in Journal of Science Communication, and it's lovely to so the kind of methodology that they use is co-creation. So through workshops, so we have, let's say, experts, right, in science communication and sustainability as a wicked problem, and then they actually create something together with the I think students and perhaps also some teachers as well. The result is just amazing for me as well. I mean, it was so inspiring that I asked the PI of that project. I mean, it made me like wonder, how could chemistry education research program also adopt some of these art-based methodologies? Because I mean, from my investigation with chemistry students, for example, in the context of lab even, so I asked them about some of the aspects of the nature of science, right? So it was informed by humanities, by philosophy of science. And one aspect is, this is from Lederman's framework of the nature of science, is creativity and imagination in science. That is part of science. It is. I mean, we often think of creativity, as you mentioned, it's a naively viewed as just a domain of art, but no, it's also part of science supposedly, but we don't often talk about that. And I mean, thankfully, my data at least showed that my students seem to also think that it is part of science. I mean, largely, at least. But I mean, you could ask, I suppose, even professional scientists, and it's not guaranteed that they would also consider, yeah, do you actually think that we are being creative in science? Isn't everything supposed to be very, like rigidly like put in a box because everything has to follow a certain procedure. But that's really not true, because even in experimental science, sometimes we have to be creative with experimental methods. If you want to advance science, you can't continually work according to the same experimental protocol. Sometimes you have to deviate from that, especially when you make mistakes. That is also part of a experience of doing science. And I mean, here in Copenhagen, we are trying to normalize that. Making mistakes in the lab is okay, as long as you don't create an explosion, perhaps. I mean, that is a different kind of mistakes. But as long as, you know, like maybe the experiments that the students do don't lead to the kind of like results that they expected, but as long as they can account for that results, you know, looking at perhaps, oh, so these are the errors that could be I don't know, resolved or anything. And that actually, you know, it's a more productive way of looking into science and inquiry according to what philosophy of science also has substantiated. So again, you know, like this STEAM, STEM, and HAS, it's just inseparable. Thanks.
Thank you, Hendra. Right, we've got literally just over 10 minutes left, so we'll go to the fourth question, if that's okay. Victoria, over to you.
Thanks, Amanda. And I think all of that conversation is really important. But one of the things around BERA is also thinking about the impact of all of this research and thinking on practice. So our last question asks, what should characterise STEAM education research to be useful to education practitioners? And Jo, I'm going to come to you to start us off on this one, please. Thanks, Jo.
I thank you very much, and I'm going to say a little bit about my own research. Before I go into that, I also just want to say that one of the absolute delights of the conference this year was the number of presentations that were actually dealing with this issue, and there were some beautiful examples of the work. One of the award that we've given actually is to one of those accounts from Liverpool John Moores, the way in which they're developing their teacher education work, and also hearing colleagues in Scotland and particularly in Ireland talking about that. So I would also like to invite us, when we go over into our breakout groups, to just kind of maybe develop this area a little bit and see what I'm saying really just as a starting point, and to find out what else is going on. And I hope Rory is also going to pick up a little bit in terms of his research in relation to this area. So my research came from on the back of running an arts-led creative learning programme and working with a cultural organisation very much situated in the community. So picking up a little bit on the kind of, you know, conversations, the pointers that Hendra's been directing us towards in terms of the glocal, you know, thinking very significantly about that local in relation to the global, thinking also about the effective and the significance of the effective in terms of our efficacy as learners. This was led by a number of engineering businesses who'd worked with the cultural organisations and saw a different kind of synergy and energy, not just about the way in which they were learning about their practices, but the way in which they got interested in learning themselves and thinking, what might that mean for the young people in our city? And so the project came out really of them coming to me as an educationist and as someone with a background in terms of arts and creativity, but their sense of this being grounded in their own practice and their own dialogue. So a kind of, in some ways, a socio-cultural framing on a practice-based approach of learning. And I think from that, what was, you know, the initial aim was to just kind of find out to what extent was this motivational, and the sort of there was expectations of the girls will get more interested because it'll involve the arts, which of course they did, but in actual fact, it wasn't gender-based. You know, what we found out was that actually everybody enjoyed it because everybody found their own sense of identities, their own connections to their own histories. And the significant thing was that a year on after it, in interviewing the children, they could talk about this as being something whereby they understood design technology as a kind of, you know, school-based version of engineering as a transdisciplinary site. And they knew that this was a space in which they were working as teams, and that teams was like a push and pull, that sometimes that was, you know, great and affirmative, and sometimes that was challenging, but that you were learning, the learning about each other was as an important part of it. And from that practice, I've worked in terms of developing with, obviously with other researchers in terms of getting curriculum advice on this, to work with teachers to enable them to work directly with that kind of expertise. So rather than as Kerry's talked about already in terms of artists working with teachers, instead of the work being directly with the children, the work we're doing now in a project called Teach Make is using a model that I've developed called the TAME, which is an art making community of practice framework, and it directs teachers to be able to design learning experiences in a STEAM-like model, which again draws upon the real world practices, again allows for individual engagement in it, but allows the community to share its practices in lived ways, which means that in a local area you draw upon the expertise that's in your community, that's amongst your parents, that's in your wider community. You draw upon things that are online. You engage in having a go as the educator alongside the children. All of those possibilities happen, and they're sort of locally defined. But there is also a recognition that the teachers themselves need to build their confidence in using those art making practices. And as Kerry's mentioned, that's been pulled out of the curriculum. So one of the things that's going on in the project that we're looking at is building that confidence up, particularly working in terms of physical theatre and in terms of drawing and making, and using drawing as a thinking process, using the body as a kind of an immediate way of trying and demonstrating ideas, working with materials, exploring how different spaces make us feel, looking at whether we do things inside or outside. That those kinds of ways of operating are not necessarily, they're things that teachers might know about, but again, in the same way as you've been talking about the way in which the sciences might make things hierarchical, they've also been ways in which teachers have a sense of, it's not, I won't be very good at that. So understanding the way in which you can facilitate and finding practices that are doable has been central to that practice. And so I think in some ways there's to pick up on Kerry's kind of challenge, there is a need to reinvest in those art making practices in order for these things to change, because of the ways in which the STEM areas have made that a kind of hierarchical default. We've often talked about the notion that the word experiment means very different things to all the practitioners that are together in some of these Teach Make projects that we're involved in. We mean different things, so we have to try it out, expand it, share it, dialogue about it in practice in order to make that happen. So, I mean, that's just one model that's working, but it is very much focused upon building that capacity in teachers and understanding what gets in the way structurally, what enables it and what makes that happen. But it's a tiny, tiny bit of practice. And I kind of wish my Liverpool John Moore colleagues were here to be able to talk a little bit more about what they're doing. But I'm going to pass over now and see if Rory at least can pick up a little bit from what you've been finding out in terms of the engineering work that you've been doing.
Oh, thanks, Jo. No, I can speak a little bit to the colleagues' work going on at John Moores, because I find myself situated in it. Last year, their approach to science education for primary teachers, this is initial teacher education training, they are really trying to move away from a science-based focus and leapfrogging over STEM, going straight to STEAM. And what is so interesting is the organic definitions and characteristics that emerge from that. When you go to these learners who are from largely in the northwest of England, it's quite a local recruiter, but the definitions that they can bring through to that, so often they will characterize their understanding and their growing understanding through human stories and their own experiences. They'll go to history and pick out on role models, and it's a very human perspective in this viewing of what STEAM means for them and the characteristics. And what I think we're finding is that this next generation of teachers that are going through this process are developing this freedom of thought, that they are not corrupted by this silo right from the offset, that someone is giving them permission almost to say, to look at these connections and escape the confines of what is probably quite a restricted, siloed education in their own experience, because a lot of these students are from English backgrounds. In the English national curriculum, very, very siloed. I think it's the new Welsh curriculum, much more moving in the direction of cutting across those silos. Same more datedly in the Curriculum for Excellence in Scotland. So it's just really, really interesting to see here at John Moores these organic definitions that are emerging, especially in response to that question of how should we characterize STEAM education. Well, if we're talking about these virtues and these values of democracy and talking about intersectionality and value in these voices, that actually there is an organic bottom-up almost reframing of that in education. In my own work in particular, I think it's quite interesting to just take a step away from the arts for a second and look at STEM integration and how the mechanics of that. So my work looks around engineering, and if we look at STEM integration and those methods of transdisciplinary education, so often it is engineering that is used as the site for that to happen, that it's engineering practices of problem solving that bring in these transdisciplinary characteristics. There's a definition of STEM integration that I think about a lot. It's Moore and colleagues' definition, and it really breaks down the what and the where and the how. And they talk about when you're combining STEM subjects together, it's some or all of STEM subjects. It doesn't have to be all four, that it can be in any sort of small or large learning experience, and it's all contextualized in this transdisciplinary real world context. If we start applying those questions to STEAM education and trying to characterize what that can bring to STEAM education, art has to be there. If art is absent, I think it's silly to say, but if you take the arts out, it just becomes STEM integration. We lose something that the word alchemy has come up here today. We lose that magical power, the transformative power. And I think we should really lean into be open to that, and those characteristics for education to transform through that. I'm really interested in the side of inequity within that. I think there is a tremendous potential then for we can recharacterize these subject areas and these patterns of inequity, and we've already talked about intersectionality through this STEAM focus. And I think that can be translated to the practitioners as much as it can the practice. I think we can look at who our educators are and what their background, what are those lived experiences, whose voices are we celebrating through this STEAM approach. And I think certainly some of that more theoretical work, I think, does mirror what we see coming quite organically out of this shift at John Moores as well, with new teachers on early stages of their journey.
Is it okay if I pitch in?
Absolutely, Kerry.
I think I completely agree with everything that Joe and Rory are discussing. I think perhaps one additional responsibility, the question obviously is about educational research and what we as researchers can offer education practitioners. I wonder if we have a responsibility as researchers to be policy facing as well, because one of the things we find, I'm less involved in the teacher training at Exeter, but one of the things we find it's hard is, I know colleagues find is hard, is managing the expectation that is set by this kind of practice, which when they go into the reality of schools that has very little arts provision, very little arts understanding, the STEAM work can be hard to fit it into the reality of the first job that they go into. And we have a little bit of power in a particular cog in the system, if you like, to be able to speak to policymakers. Perhaps, who knows, with the curriculum review, there might be opportunities right now where we could be speaking and looking at not just, the Labour Party are talking about putting the arts and the creativity at the heart, but extending that message, using that as a little way in to go, actually, let's not just put the arts and creativity at the heart. Let's put the transdisciplinarity, the STEAM. We may as well put it out the message as loud as kind of blue sky as we like, to say, let's really open that door and stop just making disciplines compete with each other, and have that message go through to policymakers off the back of our research, which sometimes they might listen to. I don't know.
Kerry, can I ask you, what do you think we should be doing differently in the way we undertake our research to begin that? I guess one of the characteristics that kind of often stymies us as a field is that sense that because of the diversity of the use of the term STEAM, and because of the differences of what we mean, I wonder whether in some ways we shoot ourselves in the foot in kind of not being precise enough about things in order to build that. So I just wondered if you've got any sense of what we might do better.
I think being clearer on how some of the work is defined would be helpful. I know in some of the conversations I've had with the Cultural Learning Alliance, they actually push back a little bit against the STEAM term. They're talking about the interdisciplinary, and I think it's just trying to be super aware of the audience that you're talking to, so that if you have a feeling that maybe that STEAM phrase is going to bamboozle or not land right, you might need to use slightly different language to get the message across. And I think how we make our research accessible, I've learned a lot from working on the Road Steamer, the EU Horizon project that I spoke about in the film, that has that turn to policymakers. So we beaver away doing all of our literature reviews and all this complicated, epic dialogic kind of papers. And then someone comes along and goes, right, can we have that in one PowerPoint slides and 2 pages of A4? And it's really trying to get down to the hub of what we have got that is powerful for that message to policymakers as well. Is probably something I know we could do better in our team, but I don't know, other people might have more experience in this, but I think there's a job for us to do there, which is not necessarily so much in the hands of educational practitioners.
Thank you both. Thank you, everybody. Well, bearing in mind that we're trying to open up this event today to kind of transdisciplinary discussions and conversations, we are right on time now for us to think about moving out into our discussion groups, where we're going to take the questions that we pose to our panel to you all now into smaller groups for us to further discuss, to share experiences, to share projects, to share perspectives. So it is over to our BERA colleagues now, who is going to very kindly move us out into our discussion groups, and we have half an hour for this, where we'll be pulled back into the group at 3:40 to share back some of the perceptions and thoughts and things that we discuss in our discussion groups. So I shall see all of you soon at 3:40, and enjoy your discussions in your groups.
Oh, that was very sudden.
It was very sudden. I was just asking a poignant question and we got kicked out, but we had a wonderful conversation in our group. Hello, everybody.
I was reading this book to everyone and I only got as far as the pink.
I am reading the same book. I'm on symmetry at the minute. I'm on the chapter on symmetry.
Oh, nice.
I'm sorry if that was shocking. It was set on a timer so that we didn't overrun.
I recognise it. I'm literally reading it.
It's a beautiful book.
Whoever wrote it, absolute genius.
Well, it's the documentation across cultures and civilizations and time, and it really broadens your thinking. Which year level would you introduce this book to, Francesca?
And to which cohort? I wouldn't introduce it to, I don't know, I level 3. Level 3.
I'm sorry, I cannot see the title. It is full of reflections.
Mathematics and Art, a Cultural History.
That is a rubbish title. Honestly, it doesn't begin to scratch the surface. It is the history of maths. And then, I know that sounds quite tedious, but it's the history of maths from pre-Hellenistic, no, even before Hellenistic terms, going right the way through. Yeah, it's an amazing book. It's an amazing book. And then, yeah.
It's beautiful. It's beautifully illustrated.
The thing I learned in that, the one takeaway I'm going to shut up, right, is Lewis Carroll, right, who wrote, there's a whole thing about Bertrand Russell and about mathematics and logic, and there's a whole chapter on logic. And in it, it talks about Lewis Carroll, who was a professor of mathematics, the writer of Alice in Wonderland. And if that's not transdisciplinary, I don't know what is. So that was, to me, that was a lovely thing. So there's a chapter on logic in there as well. So yeah, shut up, but should read it. It's great.
That sort of example is beautiful for primary school. The same is for discussing how Leonardo da Vinci, had this incredible way of drawing and designing, the forerunner to a helicopter, but he also drew amazing art. He was given a job in Italy of harnessing water. So he started to draw water hitting water in order to get into the physics of it. So, you know, it's like, what we're not, why are we reinventing how we think about really what we describe as polymaths? That is, people who make these incredible connections, and they are so exciting, the connections, you know, it blows our mind. So why not give examples of from real world practice?
It's a good reference book. So it's a good reference book, but I think if you wanted to get people to read it, they need to be a little bit advanced. It's a bit.
Sure.
I've been reading it for 2 months. I'm still going. I'm only on chapter 5. It's a big read.
Right. Okay. I'll go and look at that. I haven't got that far. I've just dipped in. I look at the pictures. And
but there's some really nice points though that you're both making, because in our group discussion, when Pam was kind of talking about the book and showing us the book and our conversation, you know, one of the big questions that we were talking about is that we need to rethink the values of education. And we did start to have some discussions around non-human, more than human, and all of those elements that impact on relationships and identities and becoming in education. And then our discussion started to move on around this notion of like curriculum development in terms of, you know, what does that look like in the classroom? Another big question that came out was what connects us to the world? And maybe they are the types of questions that we should be asking ourselves as practitioner. We want to bring back intrigue and mystery and passion into the classroom, and a kind of learning process that needs to be foregrounded. But at the moment in our conversation, we were talking about there's a huge disconnect with policy. We went back to that notion of policy, and there's a huge disconnect. And we need to really think about the configuration of our subjects, to think about re-territorializing education, re-territorializing, you know, the potentials of education, and the potential of STEAM to start to do that was one thing that we were discussing in our group.
Yeah, I think Rory was hopefully taking some notes.
Oh, pages and pages of them, because we in our session we brought up very similar points. If I think perhaps a bit more pragmatically, perhaps talking about policy and what needs and steps that need to be taken. And a big one was we need to validate and we need to collect our evidence, and perhaps we need to approach that in a way that policymakers and the STEM side of that community can engage with using their language, that for all our virtues and the value that we see in STEAM approaches and creativities and arts, that maybe we need to be approaching things through randomized controlled trials and very empirical terms to evidence and make that point, in order to translate that into something that policymakers can take on board and can action in the current cultural context that we find ourselves, which is leaning away from this sort of transdisciplinary thinking. One of the things that Lisa made a very good point, that the evidence is there already, that there are projects that we can gather on, that our community here today shows that there are people with things to say, with experiences and evidence that they can share. And really it's a call to action, I suppose, for us to make that happen and to feed into policy with the evidence that we have available to us, and then design ways of collecting further evidence and making our case for change. So really interesting discussion, and I'm really interested to see, and our very pragmatic conversation ended up in a very similar place to your conversation, Victoria, ended up about the policy and about how do we take this into the world.
I think one of the things that we could do that would be better than scientists in our creation of empirical evidence is that we don't have competing groups. A lot of scientists are like, they compete against each other, and therefore someone is better than the other. And wouldn't it be, I know it's kind of utopian, but I think it would be rather lovely if actually every steamer just joined together and we just said, well, look, this is the evidence. One is not better than the other. They're equally valid, but we do have to provide that evidence. Policymakers are not going to believe or take on board as much, because that's just the nature of it. That's just the nature of the scientists. That's the nature of how we take evidence and numbers and process them.
Just as a response to that, Fran, because we unsurprisingly, because we're talking to like-minded people in this forum, aren't we? There were similarities in kind of conversation, but one of the things that is also characterising the research work that the Cultural Learning Alliance is doing, guided by Pat Thompson, is the notion that that essentially in lieu of the kind of RCTs and that the kind of the bigger studies, of which there are many in terms of the arts context, that what we can look at is aggregating up the kind of knowledge. And I do wonder whether there's something that as a group we want to do in terms of looking at what we have and how we make sense of that, so that we don't ignore the possibilities of the kind of RCTs, but also picking up Kerry's point that she's just put in the chat, is that actually part of our job is to recognise the complexity of the learning experience, of the living experience, and to represent that methodologically in our work, but to do that in a way that actually, you know, enables us to be robust and to aggregate things up. So there's an element of clarity and classification that we'll need to be able to do to make that happen. But maybe it isn't either or. Maybe it's just about being clear about what and focusing on what we need for different policy. But in our group, that same conversation came up. We had Manal was talking about the work that she's doing in a context where, by working in introducing STEAM in terms of with early years educators, the whole issue of kind of one's knowledge and expertise and sense of confidence in terms of these discipline areas, which is something that, you know, we touched upon, but not just in terms of the arts, but also in terms of the sciences, is significant. And that sense of reassurance about where you are engaging with that knowledge, but also a broader sense in the group that maybe part of what we're interested in is actually reviewing what curriculum and learning is about, and that maybe if the term STEAM isn't helpful, it's about looking at, you know, where are those, you know, how might we conceive of the curriculum differently? So Francisco was talking about his work in astrology, you know, some of the work that has happened through the Rhodes Steamer project in terms of the Oceans project, just looking at what is fascinating to people, to learners, that then becomes a natural home for this interdisciplinary way of working, and that allows us to profile designing educational experiences in ways that are both exciting and also address the sharpness in terms of deepening knowledge. But I think the whole issue of policy came up. I don't know if Kerry wants to come in about where you are with policy, or anybody else in the group. That was just a bit of a...
Just quickly, it's astronomy, not astrology.
Sorry.
Although I must say, I use astrology as well, because astrology is part of our culture. And it has to be taken as it is, because the old astronomers, Kepler and all these people, they were astrologers as well. So it's very important, but because we have to deal with that kind of ignorance today.
Thank you. Oh, we're losing you again. Francesco had frustrating issues with the technology, but really interesting talk. Very sorry about that error.
Okay. No problem. Sorry.
The only thing I'd add, Joe, or just bring to the forum in terms of the policy stuff, is just I think there are quite a number of us in the room who are involved in the EU Horizon project. So there's a huge weight of EU funding going towards these policy roadmaps, which will come through next year. And I think it's absolutely fascinating to wonder what the EU are actually going to do with that, because they've put so much of their funds into it to not do anything and to go, well, that's lovely work, well done, and walk away from that. But they've commissioned it. So surely, maybe I'm too old to be naive, but maybe I'm naively thinking they will do major structural shifts with it. But I don't know. We'll have to see.
Do we have Amanda back with us? Or anybody from Amanda's group? I'm just wondering, have we represented the...
Yep, I'm here.
Fab, excellent.
We were really just talking about question 3, and we were interested to think about resilience and how we address controversial issues and socio-scientific issues, and you know, the whole terminology of wicked problems, which you know, we talked about the legacy of that and how actually that can be counterproductive if we start off by thinking that a problem is something that's completely unsolvable. So yeah, we had a great conversation about that. We also talked about policy. I talked a little bit about that, you know, that there are many frameworks already for socio-scientific issues out there, and that in terms of the curriculum, controversial issues have been part of the curriculum for at least the last 40 years. It's just whether or not it's how they are incorporated. Certainly in biology they're incorporated more than the, you know, physics and chemistry. But we were kind of talking about that and how, you know, we need to start at an early age. We need to build skill and knowledge from an early age. I mean, there's, you know, there's always that argument of, well, children are too young to understand the science of a particular issue, and so therefore we leave it until they're, you know, until they're older. My own view is that the earlier you start, the better. The way you frame a problem and the way you frame the science around that problem. You know, nobody ever says don't take your children to the Natural History Museum until they're 15, because they won't understand the science there. So we talked a bit about that, and we also talked about policy, and that how you know, and until there's a real change in relation to curriculum and policy, we can have, you know, we can have lots of research going on, we can have lots of frameworks coming out, but if the pressure on schools is to produce results within silos, and there isn't a recognition of, you know, of what happens across subjects, until that happens, we need to have policy change and curriculum change, really. And what was the other thing we talked about? Kate, are you there? And Alison and Sima, the four of us were talking about that. I'm just thinking if there was anything else. Was there anything I missed out? Kate or Alison, if you want to chip in, Sima? No. Alison was talking about some great work that she was doing with her company in primary and secondary schools, which kind of did have a STEAM approach, because it was, you know, across all subjects. So yeah, that was us, really. And then we were zipped so quickly out of the room.
I know.
Back to here. But yeah, great conversation. So thank you to Kate, Simon, Caroline, who was picking up her children, but her as well, and Alison for your contributions. Thanks so much.
So I think we are amazing timekeepers, because we are coming up to 4 o'clock, which is the end of this panel discussion and our discussion groups. So I think as one of the chairs of this session, I just want to firstly thank all the kind of panel members today who have contributed to this conversation, who have produced those wonderful kind of videos and presentations of their work, and given us so much to think about and to take away and to think about in terms of STEAM, in terms of creativities, in terms of race, in terms of the arts. So this is a hand clap for you. Thank you so much for joining us for this Vera SIG event. And I imagine that there is a lot for the STEAM SIG to take away from this, in terms of the kind of collective kind of thoughts that have been generated and the provocations that have been generated from this session, which I'm sure that you are going to take forward in your SIG. Likewise, I know that Lisa and I definitely have a lot to think about in terms of creativity's role in STEAM, in transdisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity, and its role in that. So thank you very much, everybody. We are at this point going to take a bit of a comfort break. And I'm just going to briefly pass over to my colleague, Kerry, who is my former co-creativity SIG lead, to just kind of very briefly introduce what we'll go into in terms of the Anna Craft Memorial Lecture and when we will reconvene, if that's okay, Kerry.
Yep, that's absolutely fine. Thanks, Victoria. So I just really would like to take this opportunity to welcome you all to stay with us, to obviously take that comfort break, but to come back to your computers at 4:15 when Professor Pam Bernard is going to be delivering the Anna Craft, there's Pam, waving, the Anna Craft Memorial Lecture. This is an event that has happened since 2014 when Anna Craft died, and it's been a big part of the Creativity SIG always having their lecture each year as a sort of mark of memory and legacy for Anna's work. So we'll take a break now, and it would be great if as many of you as possible would like to stay with us and join us for the lecture. It will be a delight, I'm sure. So we'll see you in 15 minutes. Thank you. I will now formally open the memorial lecture. This is a piece of work that has been going on since 2014 when our dear friend and colleague Anna Craft sadly left us. It's something that was set up between the Open University and the University of Exeter. Myself and Teresa Kremin have been organising this, not necessarily always worked on an annual basis because of COVID and various other things that have got in the way, but I think we're on our 9th one now. So Pam is our 9th memorial lecture. It's something we wanted to set up. I can't quite believe we're on the 9th one, but something we wanted to set up at the time to honour Anna's work, Anna's memory and the legacy. And I think what has become obvious through the years is how much Anna's work still resonates with colleagues and how much it is still used and is still very much alive in the work of other colleagues around us. So 9 years on, it's a real privilege to welcome Pam. I'm not going to spend a long time introducing Pam, given that we've lost time, but I think we all know and love Pam as an amazing international scholar in creativities, a professor at Cambridge University, a multi kind of published author and a real icon in our field, I think. So it's amazing to have Pam Bernard with us today to deliver the memorial lecture. Pam has called this Rewilding Anna Craft's Legacy, a plurality of past, present and future making creativities. So I'm going to hand over to Pam, and as soon as we get the slides, Garvin, if you could let Pam know that they're with us, but Pam's going to kick off in the meantime. Okay, Pam, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. So I've actually knew Anna in 1998 when I was completing my PhD. I met her at BIRA conferences, and the memory of Anna is so powerful for me. I have photos of her like here. I see that I hope you can see this one here with her 2 children, these little birds that are down here, and also in my study at my office at work. Anna died on the 11th of August 2014 at 52, and she is a giant and remains a trailblazer in every respect. And what I'm wanting to share with you, and I hope Garvin can bring my slides up because I've got videos as well, and if they don't come up, then I'll just make sure they're sent to you. But essentially, Anna's most powerful philosophical and conceptual and applied field of research remains at the core of education for teachers and schools today. And one of the things I want to do is do a tapestry, a weaving of Anna's words that remain absolutely spot on in terms of what we need to be thinking and doing, which is why I called it rewilding, which is really saying that her ideas are still so big, so innovative, and so thought-provoking, and radically hopeful that to continue for us to reset, renew, remind ourselves daily of Anna's thinking, her advice, her warmth, her inclusion, and her vision is to be, I think, responsible and be taking responsibility as researchers and as educators, as artists, as global citizens that I know she wanted us all to be. But Anna, alongside the multiple roles and appointments she had at Exeter and Open Universities and at Harvard, we all remember she would go back to Harvard University every year and sort of go to the grad school of education with Howard Gardner and others, and had multiple professorial responsibilities, writing bids, doing research projects, and supporting doctoral students, many of whom I was an examiner for. She was a mum. She was an amazing friend. I know she was a loved wife, husband, daughter. And as an international scholar, was one of the most inspiring because of her inclusion and her interest in teachers and teaching and children and anyone interested in thinking, doing, being creative. So one of the opening slides has a poem, and I'll be putting my own poems, weaving them through in the next, I'll just talk for half an hour if I don't get any, we are improvisers, aren't we? We must be. But here is a small poem. You are a gift, nowhere near, nowhere far, a reformer, a transformer. In writing, we hear your heart. And one of the first pieces of writing that I did with Anna was with Teresa Kremen, and later Kerry came into the scene and was always, there was this sort of quartet of women. It was an amazing experience to be to learn how to collaborate. But you'll remember the book Creative Learning 3 to 11, where Anna was really onto this idea of developing creative learning. And we are still on that idea and on that practice and on that innovation of creative learning. Back in 2007, she said it's significant imaginative achievement as evidenced in the creation of new knowledge, as determined by the imaginative insight of the person or persons responsible, and judged by appropriate observers to both original and of value as situated in different domain contexts. Well, today at this amazing intersection, meeting, interplay, collaboration of SIGs, we heard new knowledges coming forward because of that meeting and that imaginative thinking what if, thinking what else. And in this idea of creative learning, you'll remember there was a video that came out about creativity. Where is it? What is it? And it was a glossy, it's somewhere in this room. I won't try and dig in to find it, but it had wonderful, glossy, governmental produced assemblage of practices by teachers. And you'd look and turn the page and you'd see imagining, you'd see posing questions, you'd see play, making connections, and you'd see these gorgeous photos of engaged children playing and having fun, teachers engaged in being creative. But then you'd look at this glossy piece and you'd see, creativity, what is it, where is it, on the boards of teachers in 2002 and 2004. And teachers would, when you ask them, what is creativity? What is it to be creative? They'd just repeat that discourse. But then when you spoke longer and longer, and how engaged Anna was. She loved talking to teachers, being in schools, observing and working with the whole manifestation of what does creative learning look like and how do you document it. But you'd see teachers would still struggle to kind of get beyond that discourse. So we won some money from Cambridge and from Open University, and we brought in these teachers that were displayed on this glossy pamphlet, and for a couple of days looked at the videos of their own practice and actually unpacked in the words of these teachers, getting them to say what's going on, what else is going on, like lifting the rock and saying what's going on under there, under the glossy bit. And so we developed, you'll recall, a model that has standing back and learner agency. And that was one of the big kind of sort of zeitgeists, was that these teachers knew how to stand back, to get out of it, to allow children to be creative and to engage in this idea of possibility. What else? What else? What if? And we developed this model that has posing questions, play, immersion, innovation. You know them all. I mean, I could run a test. What's the next one? What's the next one? Risk taking. Ha! Come on, come on. And then we had being imaginative, of course, that was part of the, creative learning definition, and self-determination and intentionality. And I remember with Anna in her house when she lived over in Luton, in the Luton area, with Teresa for a day. We had a research team meeting and the children came home from school, and Teresa and I kept working, and Anna did her amazing, beautiful performance of being the most caring and committed mum. And then she'd come back into the lounge room and we'd carry on a couple of hours later. And so these research meetings were passionate. You don't just choose a word like intentionality without having lots of evidence of where is that, what does it look like, what does it look like to actually have the intention, the attunement, the wanting to do something, and engage with not just that, but risk taking at the same, to intend to take risks. What does that look like? What does that feel like from a teacher perspective? But also to actually kind of documenting pedagogies of possibility, because we were bringing together creative learning, and you'll remember Anna saying possibility thinking is the engine of creativity. So we were playing around with creative learning. What does it look like? Let's document it, getting all that evidence together, but also trying to nail what is possibility thinking. And this was a concept which Anna developed along with its role in creative learning. And from an educational perspective, Anna considered possibility thinking, quote, as a boundless expanse, uniquely salient to creative learning. The question of what if was for Anna implicit in the learner's engagement with problems, implicit with these problems. So think about these problems. We were talking about these, what was the word? They were bad problems. Wicked problems, which, for some people to be wicked is good, but actually wicked problems are these unsolvable problems that are actually causing great stress and anxiety, climate stress, climate anxiety, sleepless nights, and well-being issues for not only adults, but, the big concern is children. So now more than ever, we need to be asking, what if we were to do things differently? And she said that possibility thinking was at the core of adaptability and flexibility, which the start of the 21st century is demanding of people, both new and old, young and old, And this is the notion of possibility. Now, at this point, I'm hoping our Bira friend has come back, because I sent him 2 emails, one which just has a 3-minute video of a conference that I ran in July just this year. And it was a possibility studies conference looking at possibility thinking across transdisciplinary subject areas. We had 260 people over 5 days. I hosted it and I co-authored it, co-convened with, you'll know this name, Vlad Glavinau, of course, who wrote that beautiful article, Which Creativity Are We Educating For? And has written a beautiful manifesto in his journal, which is a great first issue, and it's a manifesto on possibility thinking. And with Wendy Ross and with Constance St. Laurent, we co-organized, took a year of planning this wonderful conference. This is 3 minutes I want to share with you. It's an overview of the 5 days, where each day we had a keynote in the morning and a keynote in the afternoon, and each day was a different theme to those keynotes. The first day was Lord Woolley, and at the end was Hilary Kremen, and they were looking at 21st century education. There was a day on technology, AI in particular. In the morning, we had a keynote from Austria, and he's looking at the ethics of AI and education. And at the end, we had the amazing Eleanor Dare, who was looking again at ethics, but from a very different perspective, a different lens altogether. And each day had other design thinking and other themes. I want you to look at these 3.5 minutes of this compilation. And I want you to do some hungry listening. I want you to do some rewilding with me on knowing that so many people who speak in these 3 minutes speak about possibilities, and just document, note how they speak about what if and its relevance, its absolute centrality to education today. Okay, Geldard, do you want to take it away? Or do I? Can I? No, it has to be you. Okay, here we go. Welcome to Cambridge.
It's important to be purposeful. It's important to have great humility. Difficulty takes a day, impossibility. Hold that thought. Hold that thought for a second, and I promise you, you can do extraordinary things.
And that's why communities like this are so vital. Possibility, yes, but where? Which one? What purpose-driven innovation? And to sustainability, okay, how?
Open-ended possibility is. It's this idea of potential, this idea of what could be, and as it's relating to a lot of the themes of creativity, what could we as a community make that hasn't existed before? So I do think there's a nice connection there, but possibility is just so open-ended and optimistic.
There's a big contingent of psychologists and philosophers we started with, and I think now we get the value of art, design, and really opening up to transdisciplinarity. So that is a lovely thing to do.
It's perhaps a matter of breaking down all those disciplinary distinctions and saying, what does every different disciplinary approach or other approach bring to creativity? You know, what can I learn from the way that computer scientists solve problems or as distinct from design, entrepreneurship, etc.
It's about reviving ecological processes, and it's about restoring lost interest, I feel, in classrooms around the world have been lost.
Choosing to use the parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere as a clock to tell us that modernity's time is up. But we could, a long time ago, have used the clocks of bodily hunger or social inequality. We are choosing which clocks to use.
When we go through experience of crisis that involve fundamental uncertainty, and they can also contribute to our understanding of the significance of narrative imagination.
I think What If is a really interesting provocation into that. What's cool about a possibility conference that I haven't seen in other places is that it flexes imagination and it asks the question of what if.
This is a collective effervescent movement. You can hear the energy, you can hear the commitment and this drive for change. Thank you, Gavin. I'm so grateful. One, that I sent you that 3-minute clip separate to my slides. I'm assuming my slides haven't arrived. So I'm just going to talk through what you just saw, where people were redefining what if, what's possibility thinking for 5 days. I mean, it was glorious. Lord Woolley, who is the head of the Homerton College, spoke of kindness, and that possibility, that question of what if, has to be underpinned by kindness. That was his leitmotif. The first person you saw was Breeze, who at the conference dinner was given the commission to create raps around the question of what if and possibility thinking. And as was the magician, the girl, a gorgeous Greek engineer, Antonia, who is also a magician. And she performed a differentiation between probability, think what magic is, and possibility. So to perform possibility thinking, I think, is one of the things we celebrated. Someone said possibility is so optimistic. Someone else said it's the value of transdisciplinarity. It opens up to transdisciplinarity. And someone else said breaking down the disciplinary distinctions. So what do we learn when we speak to a design entrepreneur? So, listening to specialists like scientists, but break it down. What kind of scientist? What kind of computer scientist? What kind of designer? What kind of entrepreneur? How are they working with this question of what if? And then Hilary Kremen said, we need to revive the ecological meanings. We need to be making stronger connections with community and allowing communities to make those connections. Kerry Facer spoke of time, saying that the body clock is actually a very powerful means of experiencing possibility. And there are many ways of measuring time, not just in a linear way. Takes us back to earlier today, talking about intersectionality. And someone else spoke of the uncertainty, that the question of what if, it does opens us up to uncertainty. Well, one of the big issues we all know is at this point, we are living with rapid change, more rapid than we've ever seen, and uncertainty across the globe. But Laura McBain from the States went on to say that possibility thinking really flexes the imagination. That's a beautiful way to think of it. Flex. which means a certain plasticity. And someone else said, I think it was me, said it's a collective, effervescent movement that's driven by the drive for change. So I'm only going to speak for a few more minutes, but I will make sure you see the slides and the videos that took about 3 weeks to assemble. But I did it with love and care, knowing that Anna envisaged 21st century classrooms and research in schools in ways that I think she would be very happy to see and know and to be witnessing wherever she is with us, however she's with us at the moment. Because there is, for example, this, which is a series of 6 books now, led by the University of Cambridge Primary School teachers and their head teacher, James Biddulph, who's only just recently left, actually, and is now the CEO of a chain of schools called Avanti. Now, in this book, Expanding Possibilities for Inclusive Learning, another one, Unleashing Children's Voices, another one, and notice it's about unlocking research, reimagining professional development. Any one of these books could have been written by and or edited by Anna. But what's different as time has proceeded is that teachers need to unlock research by writing about their own practice and by writing in teams, writing together. And one of this series, there's a new one just come out, which is on play and possibilities of play, and another one called Sculpting New Creativities in Primary School. That's the one that I co-edited with a head teacher, Michelle Loffrey. And in that school, in that edition, there is one teacher from Finland who came back after COVID and really struggled with his grade 6 class. Their motivation was plummeting. Many would just go home at lunchtime, couldn't handle being at school for the day. This is post and just at the end of COVID. And he's only a young teacher. His name is Luca. And so he consulted the students. He said, what'll we do? What can we do? What should we do? How should we think about this? What if you helped me change the classroom environment? Well, they did. And now his classroom looks like a gym. And I really wanted you to see these pictures because they're hanging from rings. They're up close to the ceiling. I don't think we'd get away with it in this country. They're on treadmills. They are hanging from the ceiling, and they're working with not weights so much as bands that are flexing muscles, working with things, actual things. This is equipment in their classroom, which used to have just lines of classroom chairs and tables, now looks like a gym. He had to negotiate hard with the parents. He had to navigate the head teacher and the senior management. He's an early career teacher. And how he did that was he said, I've got a measure of well-being. I can measure their well-being for one term if you just let me bring in these bespoke gym equipment that he was making at home and bringing in. This is commitment, isn't it? And look at the question, what if we change the environment? What if we think differently, listening to the voices of children, being encouraged by what they know they need? Well, he's now doing his PhD. His classroom has looked like this now for 2.5, 3 years. And the well-being is off the chart, as is attainment. The children are invested and have agency in terms of the agenda for learning, the agenda for creative learning, and knowing how their bodies learn and what their body wants to do in order to engage. So this book basically features teachers, pre-service teachers, often working with them, who teach for creativity and teach creatively. But more than that, they're actually developing new creativities, ones which we've not seen before. There was a school which has spatial creativity. All of the corridors are themed with books that are on the various curricula for each year level. And the space of those corridors, these decorated corridors, mobilize young people's motivation, their interest, and it's a new vision of what might a school look like. I think Decorated Schools has been, there's books on it. I'm desperately trying to think of the one of my colleagues who has a book on the decorated school. That's not a new idea, but it is new to consult with young people together to build and completely repurpose what corridors look like in schools. There's another chapter which looks at play spaces, different kind of play spaces. They're called STEAM gardens. And there the question is, what if the learning space of schools was extended outdoors, not just to a garden, not just to a sort of green area, but where it becomes a lab, a science lab, a maths lab, a transdisciplinary laboratory, where they are addressing those wicked problems. I was going to share another few slides with one of my doctoral students who looks at play, and he's reconceptualized Anna's definition of possibility thinking and the role that play plays in it. He sort of rewilded it because he is wanting to dismantle the hierarchical binaried and what he calls, if I can read this, I put it in too small a font, what he calls neutral and domesticated and overly tamed educational spaces. That will be interesting for you to see. So another few words from Anna. She said, it's up to us, quote, 2015, as global citizens to work out when we really do need new solutions to new challenges and what our own roles are in the seemingly unstoppably shifting landscape of our interconnected lives. Of course, that you'll all know is from Anna's 2015 book, Creativity, Education and Society, Writings of Anna Kraft. She inspired so many people that were teachers, people that were artists, people that were students, children, her own children and her friends. And what she brings still every day to our worlds as academics, as educators, as teachers, is this question of what if, what matters? So for science arts, the environmental arts and humanities, whatever you want to call it, do you want to call it educational, science and technology, STEAM? It's a rewilding of our collective futures. That's what education is. And that's what Anna was speaking about all the time, was how to rewild, repurpose, rethink, do differently. The vision, her vision of wise creativity. So let's co-author pedagogies of possibility. Let's really incite the quiet revolutions which Anna wrote of in education, documenting the plurality of practices and enacting creative imagination towards, quote, what might be. One final poem. You are a gift. And throughout the slides, you'll see her photos streamed throughout. Beautiful photos of Anna. You are a gift. You have inspired the seeds of shared goodness to flourish. In writing, we feel your heart. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pam. Could I ask as many people as possible, please, to turn on their cameras and to show Pam their thanks, because that was a profound and really moving and amazing memorial. So thank you so much, Pam. That comes from all our hearts back to your heart. That was just beautiful. Thank you so much. There she is, indeed. Thank you, Pam. I just, on behalf of everybody, want to say a huge thank you to you for the effort and the wisdom that you put into crafting that. I know we couldn't see the slides and sometimes these technological things thwart us, but I felt that those slides, the effort, the energy that you put into that was with us. You lived it. We felt it. I think it was embodied in you, the ideas you were bringing through, and it just did such justice. Your energy, the memories you brought through, and the care that you gave to Anna's work there. And just reminding us, showing us why her ideas are still so vital and so important. So just a massive thank you to you, Pam, for that, because it was just very, very beautiful. Thank you. I hope we can make the slides available to everybody so that everybody can see them afterwards. We could talk to Vera colleagues about that. But in the time that we've got remaining, I would like to open up to colleagues with questions. I know Alma and many of Anna's family are with us as well. And I know Alma would like to say something to close the event today. So we're really privileged to have Anna's family and close family and friends with us. So thank you to colleagues and Anna's family for being with us. I'm going to open up for 5 or 6 minutes for questions and then pass over to Alma to close for today. So I've seen Hugo pop up. Hi, Hugo. It's nice to see you. So are there questions, comments, feedback for Pam? If you could possibly put those in the chat, that would be great. And then I can pass those questions to Pam.
Kerry, I think
Amanda.
the chat's disabled. I think the chat
Right.
is disabled. So perhaps people just want to put their hand up.
Just raise your hands and I will try and look across both sets of windows. Can't see everybody.
While people are thinking about what they'd like to say or ask, one of the things you saw in that film, and the sound was breaking up. I don't know why. It was professionally done, but you saw an artist called Nicola Ravenscroft, a beautiful woman, very long hair, and her installation with the heart of a child and a penguin. They're bronze, life-size children, and I wanted to explain. This is just just how everything is interconnected, and it's so absolutely right what Anna was saying. Nicola Ravenscroft lived in Exeter and knew Anna. She was a dear friend, and Anna commissioned Nicola Ravenscroft, who is an artist, to create a sculpture. She's a sculptor for the purpose of inspiring a vision of possible educational futures. She commissioned Nicola to create a sculptural installation described by Nicola Ravenscroft as bringing together all nations on earth in the creation of a significant and innovative sculptural installation of 6 children that each were sculpted from children from each continent and a penguin. And the idea is that it raises intellectual and emotional awareness of the urgent need to educate children and adults alike in the art of sustainable water management and conservation, and seeks peacefully to effect change both to public policy and to human behaviour. Well, Nicola Ravenscroft, with a heart of a child and a penguin, 6 children and a penguin, lived for 2 terms in the University of Cambridge Primary School. And we did a STEAM project enacting across the curriculum STEAM practices, which you'll see in the slides when they come. And just email me, I'll email them to you. No, don't just email me. Email Vera and I'll send them to them. And what's amazing is that those children, you know, they're like the continuity of Anna, the sort of peacemaking, thinking about global citizenship, thinking about the most precious resource we have, which is children, and yet enabling children to inspire adults in such a way that it's just a manifestation of Anna. So we had them at the conference, and Nicola was there for 5 days and had written a story about the making of them, and people could go into a room and meet with these children and the penguin, because you can play his hair. It's like a mbira, like an African thumb piano. And we've done several pieces of research, funded research, with that amazing installation. So Anna's vision, again, of inspiring, you know, possible educational futures by commissioning Nicola Ravenscroft as a sculptor to create, and she's still doing them. She's creating armies of them, and enacting peaceful and sustainability issues across the globe. Yeah.
I can't see any other questions, so if anybody has one, please shout. But I'm going to ask a question in the meantime. This is a question that I would personally like to ask Anna, and I'd be very interested in your opinion on it. I think many of us have taken Anna's work and over the years have worked with it into a post-human, new materialist realm. And I would be fascinated to have that conversation with Anna about what she thought of where the ideas have gone, what we've all done with some of those ideas. And I just wonder if you have any. I'm sure I've got some, but I would be fascinated to hear what you think Anna would think about this turn that we've all taken.
Yeah, me too. I mean, Anna wrote about wise humanizing, and was writing at a time that was very exciting, you know, with the Naki report and Ken Robinson, you know, writing with a team of people about how creativity is expressed across all disciplines, all facets of life. And they were still kind of focused, though, on professions and disciplines and domains, processes and products, still in that language, sort of a bit locked in that language set. And when Anna started writing about wise humanizing, you know, the wisdom of creativity, and looking at disciplines, she was pushing. I had quotes on one slide about, you know, the importance of going beyond the discipline, and she was really at the end of one of her final books really speaking about transdisciplinarity. She was going there. She was on her way. But when you come to post-humanism, and for those that are you know, especially with early childhood and primary education, I mean, this is about learning as an encounter between young children and environments. This is about non-human actors, the earth, trees, the sea, multiple species, birds, bees, you know, and the importance to recognize that humans and more than humans need to come together to productively advance what we know about possibility thinking about creative learning, about sustainability, about lifelong partnerships with more than human nature, culture. I think she was well on her way, and I think as a philosopher, because she was first and foremost a philosopher who turned researcher, and she reminds me very much of Karen Barad, who is a physicist, who sort of turned arts, humanities, social scientist, education, feminist researcher. I mean, she has moved from, a very specific science to the social sciences and its implications for education and researching education. So this is where I think Anna would have just flourished and taken. I think she'd be delighted that we're going there. She would always, though, and you'll recall, trouble us, keep troubling. What do you mean by intentionality? And, we'd be tearing our hair out, kind of, I don't know. Well, and there was sort of this beautiful openness. You could just doubt yourself. You could say, I don't know about this, and not even agree with Anna, because I never agreed with her small c, big C. It was just too binary. It was just two at the ends of a polarity. And I think she would have moved as well, because we're all kind of really dismantling that human exceptionalism and thinking there's more than just humans on this planet. And unless we start acknowledging that and writing them into the research and the education and engaging children in, profound ways, like Penny Hay, for example, in Bath, who was Anna's doctoral student, who's, got forests of imagination programs, play-based programs. So there are many people who are really, advocates and trailblazing on the same path that Anna sort of raised them up to as a doctoral student. So I think, in short, I think she would be critical, of course, always philosophical, but she'd be saying, make the concept clear, make everyone understand it, and let's unpack the concept so that it's you get inside it, you get underneath it, you go through it, and publish and present.
Absolutely, yeah. I think I'm with you, Pam. I think to a certain extent Anna's ideas, and Anna is with us because we all hold those ideas, and they're just intuitively in what we're now all taking forward. So yes. I think you're right. Yeah.
I can only say finally, we stand on the shoulders of giants. Anna Kraft is a giant. She is a trailblazer. When we put our names to publications, she is there every day. I see every time I type creativity, all sorts of stuff from Anna comes up. She is not gone, and she is not forgotten. Every publication, every word we say in terms of creative learning, creativity, lifelong learning, possibility thinking, all these words are hers, and we celebrate Anna and continue to rewild the ideas. And I think she'd like it. I feel she'd approve.
I think she would. Brilliant. I'm gonna pull us in there because I know Alma would like to say something to wrap up the event. Alma, are you there? Alma and Morris, I did see you on screen earlier. Brilliant. And Naomi as well. How are you, Naomi? Brilliant. Alma, Morris, over to you.
Yeah. Can you hear us, Kerry?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So we just wanted really to chip in, and first of all, to thank you, Pam. That was a passionate address, and the passion came really through. Thought-provoking. You said it would be, and it was. And thank you for those amazing tributes to Anna, lovely tributes. And I agree with Kerry. I think we all agree with Kerry. Anna would have been excited by all these new ideas. She loved new ideas, but she would have been saying, well, as you said, let's look at it from the other point of view.
Yeah.
We also wanted to thank Kerry and Teresa, who we haven't seen actually. Kerry, is Teresa in the room?
Unfortunately, Teresa couldn't be with us. She was due to be with us, but has had a family medical emergency, so isn't with us today. But I will pass on your thoughts to her. Thank you, Alma.
We wanted to thank you because every year you and Teresa together, you curate this event and make it an occasion. And working always now, which is a really good idea, alongside Vera colleagues who do a lot of the groundwork behind the scenes. And we saw some of it or heard some of it today. And we also wanted to thank the two universities. I mean, it's remarkable the way the two universities, the Open University and the University of Exeter, have been so generous in sponsoring and having the idea of sponsoring and looking ahead a series of lectures for each of the 10 years since Anna died. But if there's going to be a 10th one, Kerry, it'll be 11 years since she died, went before the 10th one. I've mistakenly been circulating people saying this is the 10th and final. But
no, because we missed one because of COVID.
Yes.
Yeah, but we're hoping to make a little bit more noise and splash for the 10th one as the last one. So that there will definitely be a 10th one next year. So watch this space for that one.
So for Morris and me, speaking for the two of us, and speaking also for Anna's sister Naomi, and for Anna's family, and I think somebody spotted Hugo. I haven't seen him on the screen, but hello, Hugo. But for all of us, it is always a bittersweet occasion. She was always so vibrant, so alive. Pam brought her back to life again this afternoon, always full of fun, much loved as a daughter and a sister and a wife and a mother. And we can't deny our lives are just poorer without her. So we're so immensely grateful to you all, the way you honor her memory every year like this with such respect and such affection, and the way you've been taking her work forward in so many directions, always with loving care and respect and comradeship. And looking back at the 10 years where we've been privileged to listen to leading educationists exploring many different perspectives on creativity in education. We started with the late Professor Ken Robinson that Pam mentioned a few minutes ago. He's talked about from what is to what might be, and including Professor Howard Gardner from Harvard. His questions were where, how, and what next? All still questions that we're still answering. And then on to Kerry last year on creative ruptions and turning things inside out and in different directions. And now today, Pam on rewilding Anna's legacy, which you've done so well, set us on that path. And as Howard Gardner himself commented, Anna's early death was a tragedy, but her life was an inspiration. Yeah. You know, we were glad to hear that there's recordings for all the events. I hope I'm right in saying that. And perhaps we should be thinking of some way in which they could be put together so that they were available, so you didn't have to search in different directions to look at different ones. Bringing them together, perhaps with a linking paragraph, I think would be a nice thing to do.
Yeah, we can look at that for the culmination next year, Alma, definitely. So
we do know. You have no doubt in your minds how much Anna valued your friendship and how much she admired you all and how much she enjoyed collaborating with you when she was alive. And over this 10 years, it's been a great pleasure for all her family and all her friends to be able to join you for these annual gatherings in our memory. It's been a privilege for us to hear how our chosen field, creativity in education, is being developed and disseminated, a real privilege. So thank you again, all of you, for continuing to nurture and take her ideas forward, and our very warm wishes to you all. So see you all again next year.
Thank you so much, Alma. And I think there will be more, the last one next year. And you know what, it's not a difficult thing to do this honouring. I think Pam would probably, and if Therese would here, would agree. Anna's work genuinely lives on in all of our work and all of the people that are collected here and all the people that will watch the recording. So it's not hard for us to do that honouring, because it's just genuinely part of what we are still doing. So yeah. Okay, I'm gonna wrap us up there. Say thank you so much to, I also saw Ella in the audience as well, Ella, Hugo, all of Anna's family who've joined us. Thank you so much to Pam. You are an inspiration, the fact that you did that without your slides. Thank you so much, and I'm sorry we need to figure out what happened, but we will get the slides to everybody so that they have them. But I genuinely don't think, you know, what we got was from the heart, and it was amazing. So thank you so much, Pam. I would really appreciate your improvisations, but also all the effort that I know you put into developing everything. So thank you, everyone. We will get the slides out to you.